Hello. I hope everybody can hear me. The response would be nice in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, but I will start anyways. So my name is Stefan Belser. I'm working for the Institute for Production and Logistics in Bremen, Germany. And I worked as a researcher. My background is engineering, but I work in a field now that's very familiar to all of you because it's the topic of the summit. So conversational AI, and my project that I'm going to present is called Coala. That's for cognitive assisted agile manufacturing for a labor force supported by trustworthy artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk about designing and testing conversational AI in manufacturing, which is the application field for this project. And in my first slide, I will just give you an outline what will happen next. I will talk about digital intelligent assistants, how we see them in the Coala project, what they are for us. I will talk about factories as workplaces because I'm not so familiar that every one of you knows how it looks in a factory. Then I will say something about how the assistant can support the workforce, people in factories. And then I will talk about designing and testing aspects related to manufacturing. And then there's a brief outlook. So first, what is the meaning of a digital assistant for us? First of all, one of the most visible features or hearable features is that you interact through natural language. A second aspect is that the assistant supports or takes over time-consuming, stressful, and other unwanted activities. And oftentimes, it also knows and does things that we associate with intelligence. So in this sense, it's really an artificial intelligence in the literal sense. Then the assistant itself is also something that we call amorphous compound technology. And that is because it's not so clear upfront what the assistant can do. Of course, it depends on the skills that you load into the assistant, similar to the apps in a smartphone. And then the amorphous backend is the very big world of IT, business IT, and in manufacturing also specific systems for instance, asset monitoring and monitoring the machines or data analytics in particular and various kinds of media. So this is what we are going to access with an assistant, and the working principle, I think, is very familiar to all of you. So I will not go into details here. Factories as workplaces. The factories in the workplaces, factories as workplaces means it's a very heterogeneous environment. So that means we have areas which are sometimes very far, very wide-reaching, so you need to walk quite a distance to get there. And in other cases, it can be very narrow. So if you work in some areas, then you can hardly move. This is something to consider. Then obviously noise is a factor. And also there is a mix between manual labor and automated tasks. So a lot of machinery runs more or less by itself, has to be supervised and monitored by humans, of course.
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can I do something?
Yep, so your slide isn't changing.
Okay, that's very bad.
Your slide isn't changing and your audio isn't so good.
Okay, can I do something about it? I don't know. It's the university network. I'm not so sure. Maybe I can start sharing the screen again. Just give me a second. Can you see the slides at least now? Any difference? Okay. Yeah. You see the slide with the factory?
Yes, it's better now.
Okay. Good. Okay. Then I'm going to say now something about the assistant that we have and the two use cases that we're covering in the project. So the first one is for augmented analytics. That means we're using the assistant to help people use data analytics tools, and users can interact with the analytics tool here via dialogues. And also the assistant is capable to explain what the analytics, how the analytics comes to its conclusion. So it's a tool for us also to realize explainability of AI systems and improving trustworthiness. The second case is supporting on-the-job training, and that means that we want to have workers share experiences they make through dialogues. We're also focusing on different worker experience levels. So some workers need more advice, for instance, or different advices compared to others. If you think of novices and experts, then we're trying to address that. And the assistant also adapts its advising behavior in the learning process. So it will behave different depending on what you know and what you learned. The next slide here is about one of the cases, augmented analytics, and in particular here something from predictive maintenance, so maintenance with the help of artificial intelligence. It's a forecast for the hydraulic fluid consumption in a machine, in a factory. And what we allow the user to do is that the user asks for a prediction, for forecast here, and receives information what the user should do, what the worker should do to fill up the fluid in principle. And one of the important aspects here is that we are interacting with machinery in the real world, and we are referring to machinery in the real world in our dialogue. And that means we need to somehow let the assistant know what we're talking about. And here in this case, we're using QR codes attached to the machines. We're going to read them with a mobile app, and then our assistant can know what we are talking about. And this is a very frequent functionality that we use to interact with different physical things in a factory. This is a second use case for on-the-job training support, and here you can see three different dialogues. In this case, the left side dialogue is for a novice asking for instructions. So the scenario here is that the worker has to execute a certain checklist step by step. The checklist is very long, so you cannot visualize it properly because it has 50 or up to 100 individual steps. And the novice here has to somehow get guidance while doing the steps in the checklist. Then the illustration in the middle shows how someone shares knowledge with an assistant, so some knowledge about a process in a factory. And the right-hand side illustration is then about providing different kinds of learning content. So when workers have a question how to do something or what something looks like or is, then they can get some hint here, some information. The next thing I want to talk about are different design aspects that we have to cover in manufacturing. Foremost, I will talk about the environment, the manufacturing environment, ethics, privacy, and I will not talk about usability, but that is, of course, a key factor too, but it's not focused here in the presentation. The first point here I want to mention is the manufacturing environment, and there we have different design choices to make. Of course, we have the typical choice to what extent we're relying on screens or voice. So it is really something that it depends on the specific factory environment. Some tasks benefit from voice really extremely because you have hands-free and eyes-free. So that can be very important in terms of inspection work, for instance. And one of the aspects that most people will question when we say that we are developing an assistant for manufacturing is noise, because they say, yeah, it's noisy, you cannot use the assistant with voice. We address this problem with commercial tools, so microphones, headsets that are industry-proof, and we simply connect these to a mobile device. So this is how we can at least address the problem in some way, in a satisfying way. And you see me here in the lower right with ear shells for my own protection in a noisy environment, but also to connect the part with the noise filtering microphone. And then, unfortunately, I also have to wear a mask here. So this is an additional problem that we have in the factories right now in terms of managing the speech-to-text step in our assistant. Then another problem that we face more and more is applied AI ethics. This has to do with how the political leaders and the society sees AI and what they expect from AI. And I put in here in this circle some influencing factors in terms of applied AI ethics. One of the quite important ones in professional environments, in corporate environments, is balance of power. So the one that uses the assistant and the one that tells you to use it, those have different power. So this influences how people use an assistant. This influences how people think about an assistant and has to be considered here. Then we have a loss of autonomy and we also have bias in training data. Now, what we try to do in Coala is we are trying to practice ethics by design. So from the first step, we are trying to think about ethics also, but at some points we need to look at trade-offs. So here, for instance, one trade-off is that whenever you want to delegate something to the assistant, then it is so that you will give up some of your autonomy, at least for some time, but you gain some free time. And there is an inherent danger that if you do that too often or rely too much on the assistant, then you lose your own skill in doing what the assistant does for you. That's at least a concern here. And then we also have certain biases in amongst the workforce that we have to deal with, have to manage somehow. And one of the most visible ones when you visit a factory or certain kinds of factories is that there will be either a lot of males or a lot of females, and not such a good typically balanced distribution here. So this is something to consider too. And then also we are facing very serious problems in terms of questions. What happens if an assistant suggests something that could hurt a user, or where an asset could be damaged or something? How do you deal with this? How do you deal with situations where the outcome is quite severe? Another aspect is workers' privacy. In this case, we're bound, of course, to the GDPR as a European project. That's the law that we have to follow, but the law here means that we have to consider a lot of things when we want to deal with personal data. There's also the worker council and worker union that we need to look at, and labor laws. And again, the initial idea is that we practice privacy by design, and preferably we don't want to use personal data, because that would mean the least effort from our side. But unfortunately, then there's also design choices to make. We cannot personalize functions in such cases if we completely avoid personal data. And oftentimes it's simply not possible at all, because in a professional environment, you might want to restrict the access to the assistant. So you need to know who has access. And in that moment, you are somehow capturing workers' names probably somewhere. So then you work with pseudonyms, and that is already a kind of, or that is already working with personal data in principle. Then again, we also have certain situations which are very hard to control and deal with. What happens, for instance, if a worker names a co-worker during a conversation, like explaining that a certain worker did something, and the assistant captures this utterance, and then it's in the system. Personal data is in the system. How do we deal with that? There are technical solutions, certainly, but there are also non-technical solutions, like training the workers what they should do, what they should not do when working with the assistant. Then comes, of course, at some point where you have your application, where you have your assistant, you need to test it. When you practice kind of agile process, then you will have something to test very early in the process, so you can start doing something. But in general, what we're trying to cover are certain areas of our assistant that has to do with how our technology stack is built. We have to test the user interface, of course, and real-world interactions. So how people interact with the physical things and the assistant at the same time. How does that work? We also have to test our layer 1 assistant or layer 1 conversational AI. In our case, we use Mycroft, an open source digital assistant, and then we need to work with the skills that we have there. Some of these skills might lead us to a second layer of conversational AI. In our case, we are using a skill that is leading us to a Rasa stack. And then we also have the custom modules that we built for our assistant, such as product quality prediction or other kind of AI-driven tools often. And we have to test all these areas somehow. Then the testing focus itself is on system usability, cognitive workload, and trustworthiness, AI trustworthiness. And here we are focusing on the trustworthiness aspect right now. The other aspects will come in the second phase of the project that we will reach very soon at the end of this month. And in terms of test users, of course, when you want to test in the factories, you need the workers' council permission. That's something to try to get very quickly and early in the project, because it can take quite a long time. And oftentimes, as I said, we have this inherent bias in the workforce. So we need to somehow select the testers also in a way that it's not necessarily representative for how the workforce is built up. The outlook here is that we're intensifying and evaluating the testing process in principle. And one of our main concerns as a European research project is that we are looking at trustworthiness, and we're using a tool called Altai here to see how we perform in terms of trustworthiness. And you can see here a result from February this year. You see that we have certain kinds of weak spots and certain areas where we are quite good already. So this gives an idea how trustworthiness can be assessed and how it looks like for an assistant like the Coala assistant. That's it for my presentation. Thank you for your attention. We have a few minutes left. So if there are questions, I can answer questions. But I don't see any questions. So no questions. Then I think that we're done so far. You can visit the project, of course, via its website. We have some videos there that explain how our solution works, how our assistant works. We have a LinkedIn and a Twitter profile also with news, and you can get in contact with us anytime to learn more about our work and what it covers in particular. So we have much more than I presented here now, but there's need for specific talks then. Okay, thank you for your time. And for those, thanks for your time, and hope there are some contacts after this session. Goodbye.